and welcome to International Women's Day 2021, the virtual conference and today's webinar, Women in Leadership and STEM. My name is David Kelly. I'm the Executive Director here at the British Chamber of Commerce in Singapore. For the second year running, the Chamber is holding its annual International Women's Day celebration virtually. And whilst COVID has changed many things, important discussions around gender equality continue. And for the second year, we bring you a very special four-part conference addressing important topics such as women in STEM, challenging bias and diversity in startups. Over the next 8 days, we will bring you 3 interactive webinars with fantastic guest speakers who will open the floor to your questions and perspectives. On Wednesday next week, we will hold a dedicated podcast episode, which will be released on the Chamber's channel. So please check that out, which was launched earlier last year as well. Please also join us on Monday next week to hear from those who have chosen to challenge the status quo and created opportunities for themselves, their colleagues and communities. Our panel of leaders have pushed boundaries, asked questions and worked to promote positive change and reduce resistance for a more diverse and inclusive present and future. The third webinar in our series of the conference on the 11th of March will see the British High Commissioner, Her Excellency Cara Owen, sit down in conversation with Jenny Campbell, founder of Your Cash and former panellist on Dragon's Den, the BBC show in the UK. Jenny was previously awarded Businesswoman of the Year, and she stays true to her favourite business motto, live by corporate standards but breathe like an entrepreneur. So please do join us to pose your questions live to Jenny. This fantastic conference would not be possible without the support of our Women in Business Committee, who work extremely hard to keep these important topics at the forefront of our minds. So thank you on behalf of the Chamber to the committee and for all that you do in this area. I'd also like to make a huge thank you to Barclays Bank, our diversity and inclusion partners who support all of our activity that we deliver in this space. I would like to introduce you now to Alex Harrison, Singapore Country Manager and Head of Corporate Banking, Asia Pacific and Middle East at Barclays, to say a few words. Alex, a very warm welcome to you and thank you.
Thank you for the hugely warm welcome. Hi everybody, I'm Alex Harrison, CEO of Barclays in Singapore, as well as being Head of Corporate Banking for Asia Pacific and the Middle East. And more importantly, actually, I'm co-chair of the Barclays Women's Network across Asia Pacific as well. I'm delighted to open the BritCham Singapore International Women's Day 2021 virtual conference and covering the important subject of women in leadership and STEM industries conducted in partnership with Barclays. We at Barclays are very proud to be the official diversity inclusion partner of BritCham Singapore. In fact, we've been working with BritCham now for a number of years, including the chairmanship of the Chamber's Women in Business and Diversity Inclusion Committees. Barclays is a very strong supporter of diversity inclusion in the workplace. As an organisation, we remain focused on increasing the diversity of our employees and are committed to strengthening our supportive and inclusive culture. In order to truly create such an inclusive culture, we need to ensure that we collectively challenge biases and stereotypes. So this year's theme for International Women's Day is Choose to Challenge. And for Barclays, this means opening a dialogue around stereotypes and gender biases and how we challenge these. We also want to actively recognise and celebrate the achievements and successes of all women from all backgrounds. For today's session, though, statistics and research do not lie. Around 30% of the world's researchers are women. Less than a third of female students choose to study higher education courses in subjects like maths and engineering, and women working in STEM fields publish less and receive lower compensation. Equally, research shows that women in these fields receive higher levels of bias and gender stereotypes, and hence retention is a critical problem. As a former research scientist myself and a father, most importantly, of 2 bright young daughters who are looking at their future career options and currently thinking about what they choose to do in the future, I've seen firsthand the palpable bias that exists when discussing STEM fields with female students. And whilst much good work has been done to inspire women and girls to study in technical fields, much more needs to be done to attract the very best talent irrespective of gender. It's not only the right thing to do, but closing the gender gap and attracting more women into STEM is just sound economic sense. I'm very, very excited about today's discussion and hearing from our panel of experts for what will be an enthralling and stimulating conversation to see how we can accelerate the pace of change and bring diverse groups together for the benefit of individuals, companies and societies. Without further ado, I trust you will join me in welcoming all of the speakers today. Thank you for your kind welcome, David, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thanks again to Barclays Bank for working with us on this great programme that we've got for you over the next 8 days. Thank you again. As we go through today's presentation, please do use the Q&A facility on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Our panel will address as many of these questions as possible following the presentations. So without further ado, let's get stuck into it. I'm delighted to introduce you to our moderator for today, Tanya Breyer, broadcaster at CNBC. Tanya is the host and executive producer of a number of hugely popular series across CNBC's international network, including the critically acclaimed CNBC Meets, where she gains access to some of the world's most inspirational figures to find out the secret of their success and how their philanthropy changes lives. Tanya, a really warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and over to you to start the session.
Well, thank you so much, David. Thank you to Alex as well. And I'm so thrilled to be part of this conference. It's an absolute privilege to be the moderator for the first discussion of a really important topic, Women in Leadership STEM. Next week, my network, CNBC, well, I wish it was my network, the network that I work for, we're proudly hosting not only International Women's Day, but we're also hosting International Women's Week. And we're talking about closing the gap. And we're very proud to use the platform to encourage and inspire women and girls, just like the conference here. I'm personally very passionate about mentoring, and I spend as much time as I can helping where I can girls and women who want to come into my field. We hope that this discussion can help inspire some of those who may be watching today. And on behalf of everyone here at the conference, I would like to personally welcome you, and please put your questions to my esteemed panel. And without further ado, I'd like you to meet my distinguished panel. So please welcome Dr. Cindy Goh, Director, University of Glasgow, Singapore. We have Larissa Tan, CEO of Vanda Electrics. Anna Green, Head of ISV Segment Asia Pacific and Japan, Amazon Web Services. And Simon Middlebrough, Chief Executive Officer, Singapore Aero Engine Services Private Limited. I'd like to now call on Dr. Cindy Goh first.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Good afternoon to everyone joining us from this part of the world, and good morning to those who has just started your day. My name is Cindy Goh, and I'm the director for the University of Glasgow in Singapore. I'm delighted to be here today, and I want to thank BritCham for the invitation to share a topic that is close to my heart. I've been asked to share about my experience in STEM, more specifically engineering, as that is my background. I graduated with a bachelor in electronics, electrical engineering, and later moved on to focus in AI for my research. Next slide, please. Before I begin, I just want to wish everyone a happy International Women's Week and Day in advance. I hope you enjoy what's been lined up for you for the next couple of days over this week. Today, we have around 30% of women in the STEM workforce, both worldwide and in Singapore. And this is a big improvement. However, statistics tells us that there is a serious underrepresentation of women in STEM education and career, and these numbers continue to fall following graduation and throughout working life. Over the years, many initiatives, education programs have been launched to encourage more female students to embark on a career in STEM. The target age group for most of these programs is typically between 12 to 17 years old. And in recent years, more efforts have been put into engaging younger school children, those between 9 and 11. This is an important touch point. Studies have found that both boys and girls in this age group have almost equal engagement with and interest in STEM. But the gap widens as they get older, with more boys choosing to do STEM than girls at higher levels. Next slide, please. A recent report by UNESCO shows that only 22% of female students at the age of 15 expect to have a career in science and engineering. So although we have made progress, we're not quite there yet. And we ask ourselves, why? And what more can we do? I have taught and mentored many students, both male and female, who shared that their interest waxed and waned over the course of their studies. And they are not sure about what they want to do when they graduate. Some chose engineering because their parents said so, that it was a good backup option. And indeed, this is the mindset of many of my female students. When I graduate, I will do something else first. And if all else fails, I still have my engineering degree to fall back on. For those who are unsure about course options, be it subject combinations at secondary school or degree programs, I encourage you to find out. Speak to your parents, teachers, friends, check on the internet. There is nothing wrong with not knowing, but everything wrong with not wanting to know. You need to have the hunger. You must be intentional. I remember when I was 17, and just like many students, I wasn't quite sure exactly what I wanted to specialize in. So I decided to find out about the areas which piqued my interest, but that I didn't know enough of. I eventually chose engineering because I was excited by the vast amount of knowledge I didn't even knew existed and the possibilities it offers. It wasn't because my parents told me so, not that they would ever dream of doing that, or that it was a backup option that if all else fails, I would try to be an engineer. The other essential ingredient that I think is crucial to sustain a career, perhaps more so in STEM, is grit. Next slide, please. Angela Duckworth, who is renowned for her studies in grit at UPenn, defines it as the passion and sustained persistence applied towards long-term achievement with no particular concerns for reward or recognition along the way. It combines resilience, ambition, and self-control in the pursuit of goals that takes months, years, or even decades. Broadly, I summarize this as the boldness to embrace change, the tenacity to problem solve, and the courage to accept failures. We often hear people say change is the only constant. And there's a lot of truth in this, especially in this day and age. Who would have predicted the pandemic and its extent? Ask yourself, what am I here for? And what is my purpose? And in doing so, I believe you will find meaning and joy in your career, be it in STEM or elsewhere. I want to switch gear here a little and focus on another group of females who started their careers in engineering, but eventually gave up. A constant struggle for many women in this group is the difficulty to combine work and family life. Next slide, please. There is a Chinese saying that goes, 入得了厨房，出得了厅堂. It literally describes the ideology of a perfect woman who has great culinary skills and is a great host. Extrapolating this to the modern day working woman would include excelling in work, contributing to the economy, family caring, all rolled into one. Such expectations and pressure on women are very real. In closing, I want to share my own experience as a working mother. When I first informed my ex-company that I was expecting, my line manager said, "Oh, congrats, but this is going to make it very difficult for the company. We've not had any female staff pregnant here before." I was shocked. I had to work doubly hard to prove my worth. It was my first job having returned to Singapore after being away for a decade. I thought perhaps this may be the norm because it was the way things were before I left. But yet policies have progressed. Maternity leave was doubled from 2 to 4 months, and some companies were offering flexi work arrangements for mothers. It didn't take me long to realize that while policies have moved on, values and mindsets have not. We are a first world society with mindset on women still deeply entrenched in the past. Personally, I find family support to be the most important for me in achieving that work-life balance. Don't be shy to ask for help and make sure you build a support system that works for you. I don't think we're saying that a workforce with 50-50 male and female composition would be the perfect solution. Rather, I believe it is looking at job roles and rethinking about the complementary skill sets and diversity both female and male can bring. If you are in a position to influence, to shape, and to make the change, I urge you to think about what your organization can do to support women to grow their aspirations and their potentials, be it engineering, STEM, or somewhere else. Can I have the next slide, please? I want to leave you with this picture of a female silhouette made up of binary numbers. This was taken from the front cover of the UNESCO report on girls and women's education in STEM. I really like how with the right composition, we can bring out the focus in the picture, even though it is made up of only 2 numbers. This is an excellent report, by the way, and I recommend anyone interested in women's education in STEM to read this. With this, I thank you very much, and I'll be very happy to take your questions at the end of the session. Thank you. Back to you, Tanya.
Thank you so much, Cindy. That was just wonderful. And thank you so much for also sharing your honesty and your own personal experiences as well. And as Cindy has said, please start preparing your questions for her. And it's with great pleasure that I introduce our next speaker, and it's Larissa Tan.
Hi, thank you for that. So I'm Larissa, and I work for a company called Vanda Electrics, and we're based in Singapore. It's a local Singapore startup, and we're basically in the electric automotive and technology industry. So we built Singapore's first electric supercar, which is what you can see. Next slide, please, Helen. And we basically focus on urban electric transportation, battery technology, and short distance logistics. So my career started quite a long time ago, and I started in banking, and then I moved into branding and marketing. So I've been in many industries. I've been in different skill sets, and in the last 10 years, it's really been in strategy roles, from heavy industry to now automotive and technology. So I've often been asked this question, what it's like to be working for a male-dominated industry. Next slide, please. And so this is a picture of the team, right? We worked with Williams in the UK to build this car, and this is the team that was behind, the build of the car. Everyone from the MDs to the senior management to the engineers, the designers. And if you look at it, the percentage of men and women is quite apparent. I think there may be, other than myself, maybe 2 women in the back, that was working on this car. So this is the type of industry that I'm working in. And people ask me this a lot, why did you choose to work in a male-dominated industry? Are there any obstacles? And I think it's a matter of perspective, the way you look at it. So looking back at my career, I think all the companies or all the industries that I've worked in tend to be male-dominated, be it banking, male consumer goods, heavy industry, and even now technology and automotive, right? They're all male-dominated industries, but it was never a consideration for me moving into these industries to think of it as being male-dominated. I think if you look at it that way, it puts an obstacle in front of you, and therefore it makes, maybe some women afraid to even look at industries like that. But I think if you look at it differently and you say, okay, well, this industry has a lot of men and not enough women, then you tend to see the opportunities in working for this type of industry, because maybe they do need more women, and therefore, as a woman going into an industry that has a lot of men, opportunities could be greater. So I think a lot of this is a matter of how you look at it. But I think the essential problem here is that it's also how we get men and women into these industries and how we hire. I think the hiring process is still a big problem when it comes to the gender disparity. And the companies talk about hiring a lot of talent. We talk about hiring these days technologically savvy talent, digitally savvy talent, talent that is diverse. But essentially, if you look at it, right, the numbers show very differently. I mean, women are still overrepresented in support functions like administration, whereas men tend to still be concentrated in roles that are viewed critical experiences for potential CEO and board level positions, like operations, P&L functions, and research and development. Next slide, please. So there was a study, I think, done last year, actually, where it still shows that about 40% of women are HR directors, right? As opposed to only 17% being CMOs and 16% being CIOs. So there is a big gap between, gender equality when it comes to these type of senior roles and the functions that women and men are categorized into. And I think when we come to hiring as well, there is a lot of standards and requirements that have suddenly emerged. We're now hiring, companies are hiring for diversity, they're hiring for gender equality. Large companies, have basically moved recruiting in-house and calling it talent acquisition these days. And what they've essentially done is they've hired external recruiters and basically located them in a different location. So what that means is that the conversation when hiring is concerned hasn't really changed. It is still the same conversation we're having, the same mindset of looking at talent, looking for diversity, looking for women, more women coming into certain industries and certain companies. And I think what we've done now, right, with these having a lot of this talent acquisition in-house is that we've told these external recruiters who traditionally have been used to having many clients, having a plethora of talented candidates to choose from, a pool of candidates that they can choose from. And now we're telling them, well, now you're only going to hire for one industry and one company, right? This narrows this sets a mind block, I think, to how people start to search for talent, because now they're saying, well, I don't have to look at people from different industries. I have to look only within my industry. I have to look for people, that work for companies similar to my industry, my company that I'm recruiting for. So this again puts a block on how we hire, and we're supposed to be hiring different types of people these days. But I think this is a big problem. And the way they hire, we're still on the same matrix and we're on the same requirements that are being used by companies. We're still asking for job requirements, especially at senior level, still 20, 30 years in the same industry. We're looking for education level. We're looking for, experience in large named companies. And there is also the problem of the gender pay disparity. I think in Singapore, the male pay advantage is about 13%. And I think, if I'm not wrong, in the UK, it's about 18%. So there is still a lot of work to be done when equality of pay is concerned as well. So, and this becomes very dangerous for companies. And what I mean by that is dangerous because, especially in this sort of business environment, or this current business environment where there is constant change, right? Big companies still want to hire graduates from top universities. They still want to poach, employees from similarly large companies or larger companies. But more often than not, people from these types of industries and backgrounds come with the same experiences. They come with the same similar backgrounds. They come with the similar thought processes. And this then becomes dangerous for the company, because if we're looking at diversity, we're looking for disruption and innovation. My question back to companies like this is, where is the diversity in thought, right? where are you going to find that diversity in thought? Hiring women, you know, women do think differently. We do things differently. We have different concerns, is a step. But then there is more to being a disruptor in your industry than just achieving national statistics of gender equality and, you know, racial equality in your company. It has to be more open-ended than that, I think. Next slide, please. So we talk about, you know, I think Cindy has mentioned, a lot of companies are talking about hiring for resilience, hiring for grit, hiring for perseverance. Yet when we look at someone's CV, right, we're so afraid of hiring someone with a blemish in their CV, hiring someone that has failed before, shown that they've failed before. We look at, you know, women's CVs, and then we see a career gap in your CVs. And the question's always is, why is there a, you know, why did you take some time out? And more often than not, the answer is because I wanted to start a family, right? And then should they be penalized for that? Should there be more questions after that, you see? And then considerations always come from hiring managers and from recruiters to say, well, you know, she may have taken 2 years out or 5 years out. Can she come back and can she then start, you know, at the level that she left? You know, is she out of touch, right? You know, we're so afraid to hire differently. We're so afraid to hire people that think differently, hire people with different experiences. You know, we talk about disruption. We're talking about achieving innovation. We talk about new products, new processes. We talk about agile teams, right? Flexibility. But yet we're afraid to hire differently. You know, we're afraid to hire someone from a different industry, cross industry. We even have, you know, even if they have the correct personality fit, the correct attitude, we're still asking for people with the same experience. We're still asking for people that have 20, 30 years in that experience. You know, there's a lot of unconscious bias, I think, when it comes to hiring women and hiring people of different backgrounds. I think we ask for change, right? There's so many things that we're asking for. We ask to be the disruptors. We don't, rather than being disrupted, but yet the input is the same. You know, and we're miraculously demanding a completely different output. And I think that is, to me, that is a bit ludicrous. You know, there has been a lot of movement in the recruitment and HR industry in the last few years, right, as I mentioned. And the way I see it is that the HR industry is it's like a table, let's say. And, you know, the recruiters, the employees, everybody are like pieces on this table, where it's a pen, a cup, piece of paper. And there's been a lot of movement around this table. What I haven't seen is someone actually pick up the table and move the table. And I think if we don't do that, we're going to still have the same old conversations. We're going to have the same requirements when we're hiring. We're going to look at, you know, women being the cheaper option, right? We're going to look at women coming in at lower levels than men, and, you know, bringing in even though we can bring in, you know, same experiences, same skill sets. And I think that's the danger in that. Next slide, please. So I want to leave you with this thought, that when we are looking to hire women, when we are looking to hire people that are different from us, I think we need to consider that we need to consider the entirety of where we are today in terms of the environment. We need to be looking at people that are hiring, that are able to bring ideas, that are able to bring experience and backgrounds that are going to complement, you know, our strategy and where we want to move in business, I think. And I think, you know, we need to start looking at people from cross industries, people that are able to join the dots, people that are able to understand, bring new ideas. And I think the only way to do that is to start, is to really change how we hire. And I think with that, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Larissa, for your fantastic presentation, very thought-provoking. And I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, which is Anna Green. Anna, over to you.
Hi, Tanya, and hi, everyone on screen. Big hello from me, and fantastically inspirational conversations to this point. I'm really grateful to be a part of this panel and really interested in this discussion more broadly because it's something that I feel personally quite passionate about. And you will hear about the reasons for that as part of this, as part of my presentation. So if you just give me a moment, I will share my screen with you. So what I want everyone in this call to be thinking about is that adaptability is really the new buzzword in terms of the way we need to be thinking about our careers. Adaptability and change, because honestly speaking, the reality is the way in which my generation approached jobs is very different to the way in which not only jobs are available on the market, but also the way in which the new generation of people coming up through education and into new roles is thinking about roles and opportunities. And what I would do and encourage all of the women on this call today is to just think very differently about their own career journeys. The reality is that you don't need to come from a purely technical background in order to build a career in the technology industry. I think that's probably one of the first things that I would like to reinforce. And the reason for that is that, as I said earlier, we have right now a landscape from a career perspective where women are able to apply for jobs, not just in a purely technical context, but many other types of roles within the technology industry that are available to them. And that's part of the conversation that I like to try to have with people when they ask me how it is that I made my career switch. And the reason also that it's important is because the data does tell us that women are less likely to take risks than men. We have men who apply for jobs when they have only 60% of their qualifications for the role, and women feel that they need to have 100% of the qualifications. And we see this time and again in a lot of the research and the data, and I've seen it myself personally. And sorry, before I go further, apologies, I just jumped straight into my screen share without introducing myself, and I'm sorry for that. My name is Anna Green, and I head the Asia Pacific and Japan team for the independent software vendor and digital native business. What that means in short is that I run the Asia Pacific part of the Amazon cloud service, servicing customers that build digital solutions on the cloud. It's a very big business and there's some amazing opportunities happening in the digital space. And what I see and hear is a lot of opportunities for women. And what I notice is that there aren't a lot of women, particularly in the senior management space, who are getting involved in driving technology outcomes. And so that's why I'm very passionate about this. What's also interesting about my own career journey is that I am not from a technical background. And that's why it's really important that we make sure that we reinforce with women that it's possible to move, to switch, and particularly to look at roles in technology, engineering and maths, even if they don't necessarily have what they believe to be 100% of the technical skill set to apply for those jobs. In short, what we really want to do is encourage each other to have the courage to overcome our own internal biases, to back ourselves and to grow and to take risks. And my own career journey is a fairly good case in point for that. And let me share that with you now. I started my career or my early journey from an educational background as a lawyer. I started in a law firm in Australia, and I spent most of my education thinking that I was going to be a corporate lawyer. After about 5 years doing that, I realized that that was not all that I wanted to do with my life. And I spent time thinking about how I could move out of that, but it didn't seem obvious to me. And then an opportunity came up for me to go and work with the Australian government on an aid project in a very small country in the South Pacific called Vanuatu. I then applied for that role, notwithstanding the fact that everyone in the organisation that I was involved in advised me not to. One person said to me, imagine what would happen if you didn't take that opportunity, take the risk and go and get involved and see what it was like to do something other than being a corporate lawyer for that period of time. I ended up following that advice, and it was honestly the most eye-opening part of and experience that I had ever made. And it was the first and very earliest kind of career risk that I took. And I can tell you that it was very scary at the time, because I was surrounded by a lot of people who were very embedded with thinking that there was only one way to live, that to be a corporate lawyer was the only thing you could possibly want to do. But what I did was take the opportunity. It was very risky for me in terms of from a career perspective, but it allowed me to learn about a whole different way of thinking and a whole different mindset. And what I realized then was that I was able to transfer my skills from one occupation to another in a way that was amenable and helpful for the organisation in which I was moving to. So I went from being a lawyer in a corporate law firm in Sydney to a lawyer in a very small South Pacific island, and it allowed me to understand what it was to be somebody who was involved in international business. And I then realised that I really wanted to do more of that. I then moved to London and worked at a Wall Street law firm doing project finance law. And then moved back to Sydney because that's where my family was from, and thought at the time that I would continue to be a lawyer, but still with a sense that I wanted to do more than just be working in a legal context. I was fortunate enough to be able to get a job at ANZ, which is one of the large banks in Australia, and then from that did what I thought myself and all of my friends were doing, which is take a job in a happy and safe environment where my family was, and be committed to that. But soon enough, an opportunity came up for me to go and work in a country called Laos. And that is a country in the middle of Southeast Asia. And the role was to become the Chief Risk Officer for ANZ Bank in Laos. Now, the job was sent to me almost as a joke, because nobody could believe that I would possibly contemplate doing a job like that, moving my family to a small country just for the experience of the job. But for me, it was an opportunity. It was a risk, but it was also an opportunity. And I tried to tell myself and have confidence in the fact that I was going to be able to learn that job when to the extent that I didn't have the skills when I moved into the role. And as it turned out, I spent 3 years in Laos teaching myself how to run a bank, which then gave me the opportunity to become the CEO of that bank. So I was the CEO in Laos for almost 2 years, and then I moved to the Philippines to run the bank in ANZ in the Philippines. And then AWS, Amazon, knocked on my door and asked me whether or not I would be interested in moving into technology. Now, it's not a natural progression, I can tell you right now, after having been the CEO of a bank, to think about moving to a technology business. And it took me some time to make that decision. But the reason I made it was because I knew that the world was changing. My customers were facing into some quite critical changes from a digital transformation perspective. And the option for me to move and learn and grow professionally was just too good an opportunity for me to give up. So now I'm running a technology business across the Asia Pacific. So what I'm trying to share with you is that at each point in that journey, there were quite significant risks, and at no point did I have all of the skills that were required for me to be successful in that job. What it required of me was to have courage to overcome my own internal biases. I really did need to do that and feel confident that at the end of that, I would be able to execute on the role. And fortunately, I was able to. But what I'm trying to demonstrate is that for women, it's not a natural bias for us. There is always a lot of challenges for all of us when we are thinking about changing our careers, pivoting in our career journey. And to me, it's something that I see all the time. And here is a quote from the CEO and chairwoman of IBM, Ginny, and she said, "I learned to always take on things that I'd never done before. Growth and comfort do not coexist." And for me, that has been true in my own career. And it's certainly been true in terms of people that I've seen who've been able to grow across different skill sets, particularly in technology. So technology is a challenging industry to enter simply because there is a perception, particularly from women, that it is something that only men do. And in the time that I've been in technology, I can tell you that it's not. There are some quite magnificent women who are doing some quite amazing things. I think the challenge is our own perceptions around whether or not we are able to grow and feel uncomfortable in that context, but grow nevertheless. And so in this slide, what I'm trying to say is that the skill sets that I had, and I use my own job role as an example, were transferable. They are transferable. Job titles aren't transferable, but skill sets are. So I was able to be a lawyer, a banker, a CEO, and now a tech leader because the skill sets that I had in building those jobs were transferable. Project management, and these are all things that I'm sure everyone out there has. These are all things that I'm sure all of you have. Project management and the ability to drive results. That's not specific to a job. That's specific to a person and a skill set that you build regardless of where you are. Analytics and the ability to dive deep to understand problems. Again, that's a skill set that you build in a job. That's not specific to your role. And then customer relationship management is another key one. Most of us have that and we build that as part of our job. But a lot of women don't naturally identify themselves as having those skills, but they have them just by default. So what I would say is don't talk yourself out of a role just because you don't feel like you have all the skills. I would say feel the fear and do it anyway. And my last couple of slides are about the way in which the digital economy is changing the workplace. So 90% of CEOs believe that digital economy will impact their industry, but less than 15% of them are executing on a digital strategy. And what that means is there's a huge opportunity for women to train in tech and get some pretty amazing jobs. Not just women, men as well, but the opportunity to work in digital banking, in digital and technology modalities is huge and growing. So if you are thinking about moving into an industry, place your bets on digital. And what I would say is that technology is absolutely driving the direction of business and the way that we construct the future for ourselves, for our families, for our communities. And it is absolutely essential that women have a vital and active part to play in architecting that future. And they should be building and understanding the use of technology in a way that is meaningful and being engaged in that journey. Women are still not represented in technology in the way that they should be. We know from data that women are, I think, 7% of women in Singapore senior roles are made up by women. And women don't like to take risks in trying new roles. So it's really up to me and people like me and everyone on this call, and I would suggest everyone in the audience, to think differently about building diverse teams and encouraging women to take risks in trying new roles. It's our responsibility, in my view, everyone on this call, to build out programs of work that help women to engage with technology, because we should be building a diverse workforce. To the earlier points from our opening speaker, diversity is not just about what is fair and equal. It's actually about business outcomes. And time and again, we know for sure that diverse workforces create better business outcomes. So that's it from me. Thank you all so much for your time, and I'm so looking forward to the Q&A at the end.
Anna, thank you so much for your words of wisdom and sharing your own career path, which is so helpful for many others to hear and to now go out and take those risks, just as you did. And now for our final speaker, please welcome, last but not least, it's Simon Middlebroof. Simon, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and good morning for those further west than where we are in Singapore. Hi, I'm Simon Middlebroof. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Singapore Aero Engine Services Private Limited. You'll be pleased to know that there is an acronym for that called SAESL, which is why everyone gets it wrong, including me. We are a jet engine repair shop, a joint venture between Rolls-Royce and Singapore Airlines Engineering Company. And therefore very much executing in the STEM space. So I guess the first question is why am I here and why am I wanting to talk about this subject? Well, first and foremost, you know, I am a student of STEM. I'm a physicist by background, and I'm massively passionate about the STEM curriculum and the skill set. and the use of that in industry. And I found myself working in a broadly STEM aerospace background. But having progressed from a scientific background into relatively technical roles, I now found myself effectively in a business leadership role. And at this point, it's actually about being a people leader, and it's about developing individuals and teams and organizations to deliver the best possible results. And as many of the speakers have said before, one of the key drivers of that is generating diversity in its many forms in the teams to allow better results. And so the combination of being passionate about developing high-performing teams and passionate about STEM made me really excited about wanting to have this conversation today. Anna and Larissa in particular have touched on a couple of examples around career transitions that are very close to my heart as well, so I won't repeat that. There are two things I want to just discuss a little bit today. One goes back closer to what Cindy was talking about, which is what can we do to address the let's call it the very early career or early life pipeline and the views of how people perceive STEM. And then I'll fly forward a little bit from an industrial perspective and talk about what leaders and workforces should be doing to look at the redefinition of work and the work environment to try and help from the other end of the pipeline. Okay, so can you just flick on one slide, please, Helen? Thank you. So one of the things that I've thought about a lot is how the definition of STEM is evolving. So if I think back 10, 20 years ago, to when I was making my decisions, STEM was, science, technology, engineering, and maths. I think for me, it always very much felt like science and engineering, and it felt like it was directly linked to very technical, academic, or heavy industry sort of activities. When I think about this now, and I look at the pace of change in the world, particularly, I think we're missing a trick about how we talk about STEM. A very simple little Venn diagram over there is 10, 15, 20 years ago, I think there were STEM industries and everything else. And I think the technology is developing now. There is an opportunity to change the dialogue in early life, society and education, and use technology as the bridge to bring that conversation closer together. Most industries these days, even if they are providing a fashion product or some kind of service industry and insurance and stuff like that, they all actually have a huge need to rely on STEM technology or STEM skill sets. So even if your end product is something that's not obviously STEM related, business is just moving in the way these days that we need STEM skill sets to be able to enable that. So I think that's a really powerful opportunity to change some of the conversations that we're having at school and in people's lives. I remember having conversations years ago where talking about some of the engineering and science concepts, it was almost abstract, that you were trying to explain things that weren't part of people's everyday lives. But we have so many applications of technology in particular. It must be easier for us to reframe the conversation to generate in technology and the underpinning education that goes with it, and interest and entice people into those areas, a different medium. I talk to my child, he's a girl, but in terms of taking this conversation forward, the application of the technology in end jobs or end industries that isn't obviously STEM, I think is very important in the topics. So how to leverage that? Very well to have that insight, but what are the different conversations we need? Well, I think some of that is us as a society, families, but it also, I think, is incumbent upon industries to change the way they go and talk to academic institutions about the opportunities and the skill sets that they will value in the future. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the kids at school today, we probably don't even know exactly what the job roles will be in 10 years' time that they will go into, but we can pretty much guarantee that there will be skill sets, there will be problem solving, there will be elements of tech that will lead them in the direction of traditional STEM, and probably in most other industries as well. And therefore, I think there is a huge opportunity to elicit more industries in there. The other thing which I think is important for industries to think about in this is also, as well as taking advantage of that accelerator in the middle of that Venn diagram, it's also to tap into what I perceive to be a much higher sense of purpose that young people are looking for in their career planning. It's no longer just, I want to work in this industry and do this job. There is a huge challenge in the world around purpose. Climate change is a good example, but it's also a huge opportunity for employers and industries to rethink how they connect with people and use that as an opportunity to pull people in. An example that I would give, I'm technically a Rolls-Royce employee by background, and I've noticed a huge change in the past 18 months to 2 years. And Rolls-Royce is probably the quintessential English engineering company, 100 and something years old. But it's repositioning itself as an industrial technology company. Now, that's quite an important change. And I think if you're going to talk to young people today, that is probably a more enticing way into a conversation and has broader sets of outcomes than I am a 110-year-old British engineering company, which automatically walks you into potentially some difficult stereotypes. Okay, so there's no definitive answers that as yet, but this is one of the things I've been thinking about, of how can I change the conversation that's happening at the early end of the pipeline. You flick on one more slide, please, Helen. I just want to then jump to the other end. So that's all very well. But once we get into the workplace, as I think Cindy has said earlier on, policies have changed, attitudes probably haven't changed as much. We still have a huge amount to do to change the way that we work. And I guess the two things that stick out there is, one is the definition of work itself. How do we actually go and redesign work to take advantage of the technology, to take advantage of the flexibility that can bring, to break down some of the rigidity that we need in some more traditional engineering and operations businesses. Again, the previous speakers have spoken about the challenge of flight out of the sector at mid-career, particularly around family ages. The opportunities that COVID has brought us in forcing us to redesign work and forcing us to accept flexibility, I think is something that we can't just forget as we move forward over the next few months. And I think there is an opportunity in what I would call traditional operational environments to really grasp the nettle and push the envelopes on how much we can design the physical work that we do. Now, clearly, there's always going to be some operational content, but I think there is much more that we can do than we give ourselves credit for. The second element to that, though, is nothing to do with the physical work. It's still the stereotypes, it's the mindset, and it's challenging those biases and challenging those unconscious stereotypes. We still have much to do in that space. Alex picked on most of those in his opening comments. And certainly for my organisation, I have pockets of the organisation where, ironically in engineering, where women are effectively ahead of the norm in that industry, but we still have big challenges in changing the generic environment that we operate in. So those are the points I wanted to make. I think there's some interesting ways that we can reframe the conversation in the early career pipeline. It's very similar to what Larissa said. If we don't change the way we have the conversation, wanting something to change won't happen unless we do something different. So that's one thing I wanted to bring. And the second thing is then, when you're in the industries, we definitely have to start thinking about how we can redesign the environment and the work itself. Okay, I'll pass back to Tanya there, and I suspect we've got plenty of things to talk about in the discussions and the Q&A.
Thanks very much, Simon. Yes, we do. And thank you so much to all of you for your insights, sharing your own career paths and advice as well. And we do have questions coming in. But first of all, I just wanted to ask all of you, Simon, you touched on this a little bit in what you said about the impact of the pandemic, of COVID-19 on the way that we work. I want to put this question to all of you. What other impact will the pandemic have, do you think, on progress, There's a lot of statistics, unfortunately, saying that the progress that women and girls are making in terms of gender parity is now being brought back because of the pandemic. What are your thoughts on that? Cindy, let me start with you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. I think that's an excellent question. I think, just like Simon was saying, this is a pandemic we cannot forget. And I think there's a lot in this that we can learn. Increasingly, something that struck me is that a lot of jobs that requires travel, right? Previously, now people could Zoom and you don't need to travel anymore. And in fact, what I understand is that a lot of organizations are rethinking about travel, and quite a lot of this is actually driven from the perspective of cost savings. Yeah, but I'm not sure if as much thought is put into redesigning the work to support women, because maybe that's not a cost saving item that is right on the top of the agenda. So for me, I feel that the pandemic, of course, it's got a lot of negatives. It's impacted and disrupted us a lot, but it's also got us thinking, different ways to work. And in fact, I feel very comforted that, the rest of the panelists, we spoke about a few things that were in common. We spoke about change, how, we need to be able to embrace change. And the pandemic, of course, brought about a lot of changes. Larissa spoke about how, you can't just have the same input and expect different outputs, that you need to move the table. So I want to also just extend that question actually to my fellow panelists and just ask them, so maybe something more concrete within organizations, what can they do to make this change for women? Yeah.
Larissa, what are your thoughts on it?
I think, making the change, it's as I mentioned, looking at hiring more women into the into companies, and it really is. It's a conversation change. It is really the way that we are hiring. The way that we hire, we currently look at a CV, but we're asking for people with resilience. We're asking for people with grit. We're asking for EQ, with a personality fit, with attitude. Everything on the CV can be learned, can be taught, right? But the things that we are asking for now in this time of disruption, this time of change, are things that can't be taught. And the only way to start to figure out whether, potential employees have these qualities that you're looking for is to start to actually talk to them. I mean, to put it in a very casual way, is to start to date them, really, have coffee with them and find out whether they actually fit your organization, rather than going through this hiring process of HR and then recruiters or in-house recruiters who really don't, more often than not, don't understand what the actual business function is, don't understand what the output of your department actually is. And how do you then hire for that function if you are not sure what the outcome actually is? So I think, there's a lot of changes that need to be made. The topic of flexible working, and yes, COVID has allowed us all has forced us all really to work from home, and forced us all to change the way that we are working. So it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. It's shown that it is possible. It has shown that remote working is possible. It's shown that flexibility is possible. But it's also put a lot more pressure, I think, on women, especially women with families, that now you have to do the homeschooling and you have to sort out the household. And, there's so many other things that go with it. And you have to work at the same time. And, when you're having a Zoom meeting, your child wants to sit on your lap. What happens then? Is that then acceptable? Right. And I think, we need to be a little bit more tolerant as well, right? With how we also approach these things. I don't think there is a sudden solution that's going to solve all this, and tomorrow we're going to have gender equality and gender pay, you know, equality and diversity and that sort of thing. But we need to move in that direction. We need to start to move, take that step, you know, change those conversations, change the way that we look at hiring women, the way that we look at hiring talent, you know, change what we are actually looking for as well, you know, and that will create, you know, more disruption, or you would not necessarily that you would be disrupted, but you'd be the disruptor. You would lead that disruption. You would create that innovation. It's like, you know, it's like a firecracker, isn't it? If you have all the ingredients, you have the shell, you have the gunpowder, what you need is that spark. But how is the spark created? It's created through friction, right? And unless you have those conversations of different thought processes, different backgrounds coming in, and that's how you generate new ideas. That's how you generate something that's different. That's how you generate change.
That's right. And Anna, I just want to ask you with this, because a lot of what you were talking about is adapting, taking risks, changing the mindset. Do you think COVID will have an impact on that, on people's mindsets?
Look, what I've seen from our employees is, and I think from people around the world, is a great deal of resilience and grit, all of the things that we've just spoken about. People put in really quite challenging situations, and I think that we will reflect back on this period of time and just to recognise that we as human beings have moved very forward in quite significant ways in a way in which we manage stressful situations. But that is an aside. What I think that we can do to make sure that women do not suffer as a result of what's happening from a career perspective is to ensure that we are implementing some really strong policies around mental health in organisations, to make sure that we are supporting team members and understanding that there is an extra layer of pressure when you're working from home and you have a family to look after and you are required to be the breadwinner, making meals for your family, going shopping, managing what can be, you know, almost like a mountain of responsibility in a very different way and in much more stressful situations. So I think to answer your earlier question, Tanya, that COVID really does change the ball game for women in particular, because we know that women just already are doing the lion's share of domestic duties. And if you then layer on top of that a requirement to work from home and look after children, you must, if you're going to be a responsible organisation and want to keep women involved and engaged, implement quite serious policies around making sure that those women are being supported around mental health and that they have the opportunity to work flexibly and not be judged if their children come into the room halfway through a meeting and ask for a drink of milk.
Yes, that's right. I mean, Simon, how important is it, do you feel, to have men as part of this conversation? What's your role?
I think it's huge. I think it's hugely important. If a conversation around gender equality for women is a conversation only amongst women, then it's only going to get half of the benefit. So if we're talking a lot about challenging stereotypes and challenging biases, and whilst Anna has pointed out, you know, maybe, you know, a few behaviour or learnt behaviours, if you like, that ladies are doing, most of those biases sit with men. So if we're not part of the conversation, then we can't contribute to the solution. Okay, so it is absolutely not unusual or inappropriate for us to be absolutely part of this conversation. If we're not, we've missed the point completely. Yeah, and it just ends up being just a random conversation, which is ironic, isn't it? So I think it's very, very important. And I think just building on the previous point as well, I mean, I'm talking a lot to the people in my organisation at the moment on this, almost like an over-rotation through COVID, you know, on this flexible working. And I think, as ever, extremes don't work. And the reality is somewhere in the middle. The positive we can take is, I think organisations can figure out ways of doing things more flexibly. Should they pivot all the way to what COVID has forced us to do? Probably not. Yeah, because then you go beyond the positive flexibility for work and you actually make your home life less flexible. So there's a happy medium somewhere where we take the positive learning from COVID, but we still reflect that all of us working, whether we're male or female, are also part of a social unit and we have sociological human needs. and extremes for any long period of time are not healthy.
Thank you very much for that, Simon. Now, we do have lots of questions coming in from our audience. So I'd like to start with one from Luciana Vicino. I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Luciana. This is to all panelists, and she asks, how can women support other women in STEM? Are we doing enough?
I'll take this one.
Good. Well done, Anna. Jump in. I was waiting for someone to jump in.
Yeah. So how can women support other women in STEM? Start to have these conversations in whatever context is appropriate wherever you are in your organisation. For me, the conversation itself starts to kind of shift mindsets, and that's really what it should be about. To Simon's point, this is not a separatist conversation. When I think about how we approach it at Amazon, AWS's organisation and our remit is that we want to be the most effective global customer service operation in the world. And our customers are global, and half of our customers are women. So it is almost ridiculous to suggest that we should have an organisation run only by men if what we're trying to do is serve the remit of half the world who are women. And that works for diversity in culture. It really works for diversity across all lenses. So that's the way to be thinking about the conversation, just simply that having a diverse point of view around the management table as well as around all throughout your organisation, you will end up with better customer outcomes. And that's purely a business driver. Forget about the fact that it is the right thing to do as well from an equality perspective. So I would say what women can do to help other women is just have these conversations and make sure that they are front of mind with their managers. I recognise that it's not always easy to drive that. It does take courage sometimes, especially when you're in an industry like STEM, which is dominated by men. But to Simon's point, we have some fantastic men as well in the organisations who are really open to having these conversations. And a lot of times it's not intentional bias. Sometimes unconscious bias can be a real driver around the way in which we are making these decisions around hiring and making decisions around business. So we become more aware of unconscious bias, we then discuss it, and it becomes part of our processes that we make sure that we call out unconscious bias when we are hiring. So there are lots of ways that we can do it in an enterprise context, but also just, being a human being and caring about the other people in your organisation and having that conversation in a very real and honest way.
Do you agree with that, Cindy?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I wanted to just add that it's just providing that support, right? That everybody needs some help sometimes, and to let the fellow female know that, it is fine to, take some time off for yourself, just because, you feel really drained after you've washed all the dishes, done all the laundry, and then you need to sit down for a Zoom call. It's fine to take that 5 minutes, go for a walk, and not feel guilt tripped because, you've not spent some time with your baby or something like that, but I also feel that it has to cut across all levels. So support and mentoring from, bottom-up approach, right? So where you have, say, 2 engineers or working at the same level, they could support each other. They could, because they share, very similar, sort of job scopes and all that. But then I think from the policy top down, something has to be done as well. And I think, if we could take this approach, then there's something that we can meet in the middle, which should hopefully work, to support the woman in the workforce. I think this is really important because, like I said, what I'm trying to drive at is some intrinsic change here in mindset and behavior, because there's strength in numbers. So if you have support from bottom up, whether this is politically correct or not, but then it will drive some policy change. But equally, it wouldn't work if, supposing top management just put a policy down. So for example, I give my own example about the maternity leave. The government says that maternity leave for woman is 4 months, right? But I was called back to work, you know, after 8 weeks, 10 weeks. And it's a matter of me just standing up for myself and saying, oh, you know, I'm still on maternity leave, right? But yet, I don't think I have full support structure from my fellow colleagues at that time, because it just wasn't the culture within the organization. And so I think, you know, it needs to go both ways. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to go on to our next question, and I'll come to you first, Simon, and then Larissa. There's a question coming in saying, should these changes come from government, or should business demand change and force the government's hand? Where do you expect to see these changes coming from?
I guess what we're talking about there is probably, I guess, employment law stuff. I think is probably where the question's coming from. So I think businesses have to take a very strong stance on putting forward what they need as a business, and then making sure that that's reflected sensibly into what that means in a gender conversation. I think if it ends up just starting from a very blunt quota system, to Cindy's point, that's not necessarily going to get the right answer. So I think it's a combination. I think there is some very significant lobbying from industry, but I think the lobbying needs to be along the lines of what Anna said before, which is around skill sets as much as anything else, and creating diversity, yes, in gender, but yeah, diversity also of skill set and thought. And I think that is then a lot easier to legislate on and set guidelines. So I think it will be guidelines rather than a hard quota. For me, sitting in a very, let's call it a relatively traditional operational business. So for example, I've got about 1,100 factory floor staff. Unless I can't change that overnight. You know, that's going to take a number of years, if not many years, of going all the way back upstream in the pipeline, because at the moment it is a statistical inevitability that some of this happens. So we've got to start addressing it back up there. And again, I'm not sure how you legislate for that, because that's incumbent upon people, society, individuals to take accountability for making people interested in this stuff and making it attractive. And then the groundswell of numbers, statistics helps you, as opposed to having to legislate for it.
Would you agree with that, Larissa? And just, you know, that visual image that you showed us before of sort of two women in the back of that Williams group was quite extraordinary.
I think, you know, the legislation part of it, you know, is you know, employment laws from the government side don't really touch upon sort of diversity. They don't really touch so much upon gender equality, and that may not also be the government's remit, really, to say you have to employ, you know, 50% women and 50% men. I think a lot of this is, even though they will probably encourage it, and as Simon says, there should be guidelines around that sort of statistics, but at the end of the day, it is just a national statistic. You know, it is not the be all and end all. I think a lot of this has to come from the company itself. They have to drive these policies, and they have to drive the necessity of having women, having diversity in their companies, because they're the only ones that know what outcome they want. You know, the government doesn't dictate to the companies, you have to earn so much a year, this is what products that you have to come out with. You know, we want to see, you know, 10 innovations from you in 2 years. They don't. You see, in order, you know, these strategies come from the company itself. And in order for that to happen, that output, that result to be achieved, that input has to be determined, and it has to be determined by the person deciding what the output actually is. And those are the companies that are hiring. And so I think, you know, a lot of this drive really has to come from the company itself. And the main culprit really is our companies. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Larissa. And we've got a question for you specifically, Anna. I have found in the past, as I changed sectors in my career, it's been difficult to show potential employers that you're able to adapt and perform well. Do you have a tip on how best to overcome this wall when in an interview or speaking with potential new employer?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question, Amanda. Thank you for asking it. And it's something that's common when I'm speaking about my own career journey. Women are like, how did you manage to move? It doesn't seem like a natural progression. And you're absolutely right. What I would say, and it depends who you're interviewing with, obviously, and the organisation's viewpoint on taking a risk on someone who may not necessarily have 100% of the skill set. But what I would say is preparing an answer in a very simple way: situation, task, action, result. And doing that in a way that speaks to, once again, kind of core skill sets. So have a couple of examples before you go into the interview of how you have implemented change, with respect to a particular project, where you're able to draw on skills that you've been able to show to be able to either dive deep on analytics, drive an outcome for a customer, all the key things that most roles require you to be able to show. And obviously, if it's a technical skill set, you can't speak to that with authority. But what I've found in the time in which I've been a CEO of a bank and also now running a software business across a region is that I don't necessarily look for a technical fit on the skill set. Obviously, functional skill sets are important. What I'm looking for is drive and curiosity and the ability to learn and adapt and be agile in the way in which you approach your own work environment, because that's what the employee of the future looks like. And I think anyone who is hiring intelligently going forward is going to be looking for that. Not somebody who is looking for a hierarchical job role, but somebody who is looking for an opportunity to expand and grow their own professional remit. And if you go into a job interview with that as a context, I think regardless, you should be, first of all, feeling good about yourself, because that's a great way to be thinking about a role. And secondly, you're giving an authentic version of yourself. You don't have to pretend to be anything that you're not, but make sure that you reinforce the strengths that you have, the skills that you have, by being able to give very key examples against problem solving is what I would say generally. So I hope, Amanda, that answers your question. And thank you so much for asking.
Thanks very much for that, Anna. We have another question that's coming in from Desiree Tan. Desiree wants to know, how can companies close the gender gap, and how does it apply to your current workplace or role? Who would like to start? Simon?
Hi, yeah, just struggling for the mute button. Hi there. Yes, thanks for the question. I'll just try and give you some insights on my organisation. So, as I said before, I mean, we've got about 1,500 people altogether, and as I said, the vast majority of those are, direct factory staff, and the stats in that area obviously don't look particularly amazing through this lens, and that I think is going to take a while to move. If I look at my business in other sectors, though, I'm quite encouraged in some ways. So I'm relatively well, probably over the average, if you like, on engineering leadership roles being women, which I think is fantastic, and I can see the pipeline coming through the organisation. So whilst absolute numbers still need some more work, I'm pleased that we're obviously driving the perception and the reality, I guess, that there is a good progression for women in engineering leadership roles. I think for my industry, I say for aerospace, but it's probably for any manufacturing thing. I think it's the deep permeation in the operations space is the challenge. Again, not because of skill set or tech or background, but that's the one where you probably trip over more of the unconscious bias, or maybe, unfortunately, conscious bias in some cases as well. That, I think, is the biggest challenge for organizations like me. I think, as I said in my previous preamble, the blurring of the line between tech and engineering in particular, I think, is going to make it easier to entice women into that sector, rather than it being very traditional mechanical engineering. So I think there is a big opportunity to leverage tech, not just for tech's sake, but as a sort of a hoover, if you like, to bring people in an easier way into a more traditional STEM environment. So I hope that helps and gives some insights from my side.
Thank you, Simon. Would you agree with that, Cindy and Larissa?
Yeah, so just to pick up on Simon's point about, you know, how with tech and that blur between tech and engineering, right, is going to be able to bring more people in. I wanted to just maybe share about actually design is another aspect where we see a lot of female engineers, and precision engineering, chemical engineering are other areas where we see a lot of engineers excel in as well. So I've taught students who, you know, they, because of their attention to details, actually come up with really good design, especially in, you know, so healthcare design for healthcare is one of the key pillars in our programs. And we do see the female students producing really good design. So I think it's not, I mean, ICT and tech is one area, but I think that design is also another area that I see quite a lot of female students doing very well. I think also that, you know, I think earlier there was a point about, I just wanted to go back, you know, to the point about how COVID, and then we talk about changes. Just to add a little bit to that one, was that even with our students, we see that now because of COVID, we can't teach in, you know, the sort of big lectures, and the students are in a way forced to learn online. So our lectures are moved online, and what we have is this blended learning where they still attend classes, small classes, they will still come on campus, but the big classes, they'll have to do it online. But I do see a lot of our students, you know, being what we call self-directed learners. And I think, you know, these are the people who who are going to go into the workforce. And I think this is one of the positives that come out of COVID. Yeah, sorry, I know I've just digressed.
No,
I wanted to add to that because I think that's really important, because that's the future, you know, who's going to be going to the workforce. Yeah.
No, that's very helpful, Cindy. And Larissa, I will come to you, but actually what I'm going to do is ask all of you to give a final message, because unfortunately we've run out of time in this incredibly interesting and crucial discussion. So I just, to finish, I'd just like to ask each and every one of you a message of hope, a message to the next generation that could be considering STEM and have been inspired by what they've heard, and for the leadership roles as well. So Larissa, I'll start with you, then Anna, then Simon, and then we'll come back to Cindy.
Sure. I think we need to start changing the conversations, right? We need to understand where we grab these women or these girls, and at what stage we grab them for them to start to be interested in STEM, to start for them to be interested in digital and technology in this sector. And I think that conversation that we traditionally have, be it with hiring, okay, well, you know, do interview questions, and also even with our children, has to change. You know, traditionally we say to our children, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? I mean, this basically determines, you know, who, you know, what company they want to work for, what industry they want to be in. But at that, if we can change that dialogue, we can change that conversation to start asking them, you know, what are the problems you want to solve? This then changes the entire dialogue to who do I want to work for when I grow up, to what sort of skills do I then need to learn to be able to solve that problem. And once we start to have different, you know, different questions, we start to ask different questions, we will get different answers. We start to have different conversations. We will see that actually people have different perspective and different talents. And then I think that's really what I want to leave, you know, I want to leave everyone with.
Thank you so much, Larissa. And Anna?
Look, again, very inspirational words from Larissa. What I would say on top of that would be, for the women who are right now in the audience and thinking about changing careers, take a risk. Take a risk on yourself. You will be surprised by how many skills you have. And to the earlier question, don't feel disengaged or disheartened if you get rejections around trying something new. Failure is the new black. So get amongst it, try something new. and take a risk on yourself. You have more skills than I think you will probably give yourself credit for. And I'm sure that you will, and I know that you'll be successful. And think about a career in technology, because it is absolutely the future of business going forward.
Thank you so much, Anna. And Simon?
Yeah, lots to agree with in those two comments there, and so I won't repeat it. I'll just add one bit from what Anna's just said there as well. Is I think, you know, a lot of the time careers start in STEM and move somewhere else, or vice versa. So again, please don't think it's a cul-de-sac in any way. I think the bit for me, speaking to you in the audience, and I'm sure the people will watch this later, and if you're in leadership roles, whether you're a man or a woman, I think we have to take accountability to change it. So the previous conversation, I don't think this is going to get fixed for us. Okay. Equally, industry can't fix everything. There are some societal and human conversations that need to happen. But if we're going to make changes in business, it is the leadership in business that's going to drive that change. So again, back to Larissa's point, change the conversation, reframe the problem, have the different viewpoints, and really challenge the norms. And that way, I think we can start to make a difference on what is going to be, you know, still a very long journey. But we have to start it, and no one else is going to do it if we don't.
Simon, thank you. And just a final quick message from you, Cindy.
Thanks, Tanya. Right, so I think what I wanted to say was that, you know, just be open to try new things, and just believe in yourself. But also, most importantly, I think you need to have the willingness to work hard, and I think we will get there. And on the point of being open, I just wanted to add to what Larissa said about, you know, parents having conversation with their children. You know, keep an open mind, because, you know, there are a lot of preconceived mindsets with, you know, children choosing their future career. And a lot of it is from education at home, and also influence looking at, you know, their parents' job and career. So don't always, you know, think that pink is for girls and blue is for boys. You know, it can be either way. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Larissa. Thank you to my esteemed panel for this incredibly inspiring and crucial conversation. That's it from me. Thank you so much for having me as part of this wonderful conference. And now it's back to you, David.
Oh, thank you so much indeed. What a fantastic way to kick off our collection of International Women's Day activities over the last 8 days. Thank you so much, Tanya, for moderating today's session. That was really, really brilliant. And just to thank our speakers again, to Cindy, Larissa, Anna and Simon, thank you so much for your sharing. Some really brilliant presentations there, and a hugely motivating finale too. Thank you also to you, our guests online, wherever you are in the world. I hope that the International Women's Day virtual conference has sparked thought and debate, and you can take away some key learnings from today's sessions. And we hope to see you to join us with some at our other events coming up over the next few days as well. The Chamber has a packed calendar of webinars coming up. We've got podcasts and thought leadership articles in the Orient magazine, so please do get in touch with us if you would like any information about the Chamber or are interested in becoming a member. And once again, a huge thank you again to our diversity inclusion partners, Barclays Bank, for your continued support of the Chamber in supporting this important agenda. And I must also thank Julius Baer as well for their supporting partnership of this selection of events too. You'll receive a feedback form from Helen and the team, so please do tell us what you think. It's an opportunity for us to learn and to continue to bring you interesting and relevant content. Your opinions are very much appreciated in helping us to do this. So once again, a final thank you, a good evening to all of you, those that are in this side of the world, and I wish the rest of you a great day ahead. Thank you.